Rules are rules, Wes. Tear it off. That was what Martin Hale said in front of almost 80 neighbors, with my parents sitting beside me and a $25,000 fine printed in black ink on the table between us. He said it like he had already won. Like our brand new roof, the one my parents had paid for after a storm ripped shingles off the house, was some personal insult to his authority. What he did not know was that by then I had counted every metal roof in the neighborhood. I had photos. I had dates. I had the state statute he had never bothered to read. And before that meeting ended, the same rule he used to threaten my family would be the rule that took his seat away from him. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because I swear every neighborhood has one person like Martin Hale. A quick note before I start. Some names and small details have been changed for privacy and storytelling, but the heart of what happened is exactly how I remember it. The first time Martin Hale told me to tear off my parents' roof, he did not raise his voice. That was the thing I remember most. He sat at the end of the folding table in the clubhouse, under a buzzing fluorescent light, with his reading glasses low on his nose and a stack of paper in front of him. My mother had both hands folded around her purse strap. My dad kept rubbing the side of his thumb, a nervous habit he had picked up after 30 years of turning wrenches at the county garage. I was sitting between them because by then I had become the family translator for anything involving forms, email chains, and people who used words like non-compliant when they meant we do not like you. Martin tapped the paper once with his pen. "Rules are rules, Wes," he said. "Tear it off." My mom made a sound so small I do not think anyone else heard it. I looked at the paper. It was a removal order from the Architectural Committee of Brookhaven Pines. Beneath that, in a separate paragraph written like a threat from a collection agency, it said that failure to comply within 30 days could result in fines of up to $25,000, plus attorney fees, plus costs of enforcement. 30 days, $25,000. For a roof. That was the moment the story looks like it begins, but it really started 6 weeks earlier, on a Friday night in May, when the storm came over the ridge and took half the neighborhood with it. Brookhaven Pines was one of those neighborhoods that looked calmer than it actually was. From the road, it was all maple trees, brick mailboxes, trimmed hedges, and two-story houses built in the late 80s, when every developer in the county had decided that colonial-inspired meant beige siding, white shutters, and at least one fake half-moon window over the garage. My parents bought their house there in 1997, back when the place still smelled like fresh mulch and new carpet. They were not rich. They were careful. Dad worked for the county fleet department. Mom was a school secretary. They bought the smallest model in the neighborhood, the one at the far end of Hawthorne Court, because it backed up to a drainage easement nobody else wanted. To them, that house was not an investment strategy. It was the proof that two people who kept showing up to work could build something steady. I grew up in that house. I learned to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. I got grounded in that kitchen. I helped Dad patch the fence after a snowstorm knocked a branch through it. When I moved out, I ended up only 12 minutes away, partly because I liked being close, and partly because my mom had a way of saying, "You know, your father tried to move the washer by himself." That sounded casual until you heard the panic underneath. By the time this happened, I was 32 and working as a project coordinator for a commercial HVAC company. That matters because I spent my workdays reading spec sheets, warranty language, energy ratings, and municipal code excerpts. I was not a lawyer. I was not even close. But I was very used to people waving a rule around and hoping nobody asked where it came from. That is probably the only reason my parents did not get rolled. The storm hit on a Friday around 8:40 at night. I remember the time because my wife, Erin, and I were watching a movie when my phone started screaming with a tornado warning. 5 minutes later, rain was hitting the windows sideways. 10 minutes after that, Mom called. "We're in the basement," she said, trying to sound normal and failing completely. "Your father says a tree came down somewhere. We heard something hit the roof." "Stay where you are," I told her. "We are. I just wanted you to know." Behind her, I could hear Dad saying, "Tell him not to drive over here." So of course I drove over there the second the warning expired. The whole neighborhood looked like it had been shaken. Trash cans were in the street. A maple limb had punched through the windshield of a parked SUV 2 doors down from my parents. The entry sign at Brookhaven Pines, which Martin Hale had once spent $6,000 HOA refurbishing because he said the old one looked tired, was leaning at a sad angle in a bed of flattened daylilies. Dad was in the driveway with a flashlight when I pulled up. He was wearing his old county rain jacket over pajama pants. "I told your mother not to call you," he said. "And I listened with the same attention you give your cardiologist." He snorted, but he was looking up at the roof. Half the shingles on the back slope were gone. Not damaged. Gone. A jagged black strip of underlayment showed where the wind had peeled them up and thrown them somewhere into the next county. The gutters were twisted. A section of fascia hung loose near the corner. In the beam of my flashlight, rainwater was running down the siding in little silver threads. Inside, the upstairs hallway smelled damp. There was a wet patch on the ceiling outside my old bedroom. Mom had put a mixing bowl under it, because that is what you do when your house starts leaking and you do not yet have a better plan. "Insurance will handle it," Dad said. He said it like a man trying to convince the room. The next morning, everyone in Brookhaven Pines was outside. That was how storms worked in that neighborhood. People who normally waved from behind tinted SUV windows suddenly became frontier settlers. They stood in driveways holding coffee, comparing missing shingles and dented gutters. Chainsaws started before 8. Blue tarps appeared on roofs, like flags of surrender. That was when I first noticed the metal roof on Briar Lane. It was not new. I had seen it before without really seeing it. A dark charcoal standing seam roof on a house near the pond. Clean lines, vertical ribs, no shingles anywhere. 2 streets over, on Ashbury, there was another one. Bronze, low profile, maybe 10 years old. At the time, it barely registered. Roofs were roofs. Some were asphalt. Some were slate look. Some were metal. The neighborhood had been around almost 40 years. People had replaced things. That little detail would matter later. For the first week after the storm, my parents did what normal people do. They called insurance. They got a claim number. They called roofers, which was almost useless because every roofer within 50 miles was booked. One guy told Dad he could come look sometime after the 4th of July, and it was still May. Then a contractor named Luis Rivera knocked on their door. He had a white truck with magnetic signs, a clipboard, and the calmest face I had ever seen on a person standing in a storm-damaged neighborhood full of anxious homeowners. Dad almost sent him away because after storms, every neighborhood gets roof chasers. But Luis was local. His company had done the roof on the elementary school where Mom worked. She recognized the name. Luis climbed up, took photos, came back down, and sat with us at the kitchen table. "You can replace with asphalt," he said. "No problem, that's what insurance is pricing. But I should tell you, with the decking exposed on the back and the age of the front slope, you're basically at the point where a full replacement makes more sense." Dad nodded like each word had a dollar sign attached. Luis turned his tablet around and showed us photos. Asphalt shingles, architectural shingles, then metal. Mom made a face. "Like a barn?" "Not anymore," Luis said. "Standing seam, residential. Energy Star rated coating. It reflects heat. It lasts longer. Insurance may not cover the upgrade, but because of the storm damage, you're already paying for labor and tear-off. This is the moment when some homeowners choose to do it once and not think about it again. Dad leaned back. How much more? Luis gave him the number. Dad did not swear in front of my mother, but his eyebrows did. It was more. Not impossible, but more. My parents had savings, but their savings had names attached to them. HVAC replacement, dental work, property taxes. The kind of savings that did not feel like extra money because every dollar already had a future job. Luis must have seen that on their faces because he added, "There may be rebates." Utility company sometimes has them. State energy office too. I can send you links. That was the first time the energy angle entered the conversation. I asked, "Any issue with the HOA?" Luis shrugged carefully. Contractors develop a special shrug for homeowners associations. It means, "I have seen nonsense you would not believe, and I do not want to be named in it." Check your architectural guidelines, he said. Most allow standing seam now if the color is neutral. State law also protects certain energy efficiency improvements, depending on the wording. I'm not giving legal advice, but I've had HOAs try to block reflective roofing before, and they usually back off when someone points them to the statute. He said it lightly, like a footnote. I wrote it down anyway. At that point, nobody thought we were preparing for a fight. We were just trying to keep rain out of my parents' hallway. Brookhaven Pines had an HOA, but for most of my life it had been background noise. You paid dues. You got a pool key. Every April, a newsletter reminded people to edge their sidewalks. Sometimes a retired person would send a complaint because a basketball hoop had been left in a driveway too long, and the board would send a letter written in the tired voice of someone who did not want to be involved. Then Martin Hale retired. Martin lived on Waverly Drive, in one of the bigger houses near the front entrance. He had been a regional manager for a building supply chain, which meant he knew just enough construction vocabulary to sound confident and just enough about power to miss being obeyed. He had silver hair, a permanent tan, and the kind of handshake that tried to turn into an arm wrestling match. His wife, Janet, was quiet and perfectly pleasant. Martin was not quiet about anything. He joined the architectural committee 2 years before the storm. Within 6 months, he was chair. Within a year, the newsletter changed tone. Before Martin, notices said things like, "Please remember to submit exterior paint changes for review." After Martin, they said, "Unauthorized exterior modifications are subject to enforcement under Article 7, Section 4, including fines, legal action, and compelled remediation." Compelled remediation, for shutters. The first time Mom got one of his letters, it was because her hanging baskets on the porch had dried out during a heat wave. "Dead vegetation visible from the street," the letter said. Dad held it at arm's length and said, "Do they want us to give the begonias a formal burial?" Mom replaced the baskets anyway. That was her way. She did not like conflict. She had spent 27 years working in a school office, which meant she could make a kindergartner stop crying, a parent stop yelling, and a copier stop jamming with the same patient expression. But HOA letters made her anxious. They came with deadlines and uppercase words. Dad hated them, but he also hated making Mom anxious, so he complied. That was how Martin operated. He did not need to win a lawsuit. He just needed to make normal people feel like fighting would be worse than obeying. And most of the time, it worked. When my parents decided on the metal roof, I told Dad we should submit an architectural request. "The house has a hole in it," he said. "We're not building a theme park." "I know, but let's do the form." So we did. The form was 2 pages. One page asked for the owner's name, address, phone number, and description of the project. The second page said to attach drawings, material samples, and color information, where applicable. I filled it out for them because Dad's handwriting looked like it had been assembled from spare bolts. Description: Storm damage roof replacement. Existing asphalt shingles to be replaced with standing seam metal roof, matte charcoal finish, Energy Star rated cool roof coating. Color selected to match existing dark gray roof tone as closely as possible. I attached the product sheet from Luis, the color sample, photos of the storm damage, and the insurance estimate. I also attached the rebate information because it mentioned energy performance. I emailed the packet to the architectural committee address on the HOA website and copied my parents. 2 days later, we got an auto reply. Thank you for your submission. The architectural committee meets monthly. Emergency repairs may proceed as necessary to protect property from damage, but exterior modifications remain subject to final approval. That sentence would become important too. Emergency repairs may proceed as necessary. Luis tarped the roof and started the permitting process. The building department approved the job in 3 days because half the county was in the same boat. The insurance adjuster came out, took photos, and agreed the roof needed full replacement. The utility rebate was not huge, but it helped. My parents signed the contract on a Wednesday at their kitchen table, while Mom asked Luis 6 different ways whether the charcoal color would look too modern. Mrs. Turner, Luis said, it'll look cleaner than what you had. That's not hard, Dad said. What we had is currently in the neighbor's maple tree. The installation took 3 days. I came by after work on the second day and found Dad standing in the driveway like a man watching a spaceship land on his lawn. The old shingles were gone. The roof deck had been repaired. Long charcoal panels were stacked on padded sawhorses. The crew moved with that quick, practiced rhythm good tradespeople have, passing tools and panels without a lot of talk. Well? Dad asked. He was pretending not to care. Looks good, I said. He nodded. Your mother thinks it's sharp. Do you? He looked up at it again. I think if I never have to climb a ladder with a bundle of shingles in my life, it could be purple, and I'd learn to love it. By Friday afternoon, the roof was finished. It looked good. Not flashy, not strange. A matte charcoal roof on a beige house with white trim. If anything, it made the house look less tired. The vertical seams caught the light in the morning and disappeared in the shade by afternoon. Luis walked Dad around the property, showed him the snow guards, the flashing, the ridge detail, the warranty papers, and the energy certification. Mom took a picture from across the street and texted it to me with one word. Beautiful. For exactly 9 days, that was the end of it. Then the first letter came. It arrived on a Monday, folded in a Brookhaven Pines envelope with the HOA return address stamped in blue. Mom called me before she opened it, which tells you everything about what Martin had done to that neighborhood. It's probably the approval, I said. It feels thick. Mom, envelopes don't have intentions. This one does. She was right. The letter was not an approval. It was a notice of violation. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Turner, the Architectural Committee has observed that you installed an unauthorized metal roof at 14 Hawthorne Court. Pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Schedule B of the Brookhaven Pines Covenants, metal roofing materials are prohibited unless expressly approved by the committee. No such approval was granted. You are hereby directed to cure the violation within 30 days. Continued non-compliance may result in fines of up to $25,000 and further enforcement action. At the bottom, in Martin's tight, blocky signature, it said, Martin Hale, Chair, Architectural Committee. Dad read it twice. Then he handed it to me and walked out onto the back deck. Mom stood by the sink and said, Can they do that? That was the first honest answer of the whole mess. I don't know. I hated saying it. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to say it was ridiculous, that no adult with a functioning mailbox could demand someone tear off a brand new roof after a storm. But I had learned enough in my job to know that ridiculous and impossible were not the same thing. People put ridiculous things in contracts all the time. Sometimes they could enforce them. Sometimes they could not. The trick was knowing which. So I did what I always do when someone waves paper at me. I asked for the rest of the paper. The Brookhaven Pines covenants were on the HOA website, but the website looked like it had been built by someone's nephew in 2004 and updated only when the pool schedule changed. The main declaration was a scanned PDF, 38 pages, slightly crooked, with old typewriter text and handwritten recording stamps from 1985. The architectural guidelines were separate. The fine schedule was another file. There were also board minutes going back about 3 years, though half the links were broken. Article 7, Section 4 was real. It said owners could not make exterior alterations without written approval from the Architectural Committee. Schedule B was also real. Buried under a section about roofs, it said, roofing materials shall be wood shake, slate, tile, or asphalt composition shingle. Metal roofing, corrugated roofing, and reflective roofing materials are prohibited except upon express written variance by the Architectural Committee. There it was. Metal roofing prohibited. The language looked old because it was old. In 1985, metal roof probably meant corrugated panels on a shed. Reflective materials probably meant something shiny enough to annoy the golf course side of the neighborhood. The document had not been meaningfully updated since people were renting VCRs. I read it 3 times. Then I read our submission email again. Then the auto reply. Emergency repairs may proceed as necessary to protect property from damage, but exterior modifications remain subject to final approval. I did not like that sentence anymore. Dad came back inside after 10 minutes. How bad? He asked. They have a roof rule, I said. Mom sat down. But we sent the form. We did. They didn't say no. They didn't say yes either. Dad's jaw tightened. The house was leaking. I know. We had a permit. I know. Insurance approved it. I know. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? Nobody answered because the letter had answered for us. Cure the violation. 30 days. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about the number. $25,000. My parents had just paid the upgrade difference on the roof. They could not casually absorb a $25,000 fine. Most people could not. It was the kind of number that did not just hurt. It changed choices. It became a home equity loan. It became delayed retirement. It became Mom lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering whether one storm had just undone 10 years of careful saving. By 6 the next morning, I was at my kitchen table with coffee, the covenants, and a legal pad. The first thing I did was search the covenants for variance. The committee could grant exceptions. No surprise there. Most HOAs kept some discretion in the documents. The second thing I searched was fine. The fine schedule had been adopted by the board 6 months earlier. Martin's fingerprints were all over it. Before that, fines topped out at $500 for most violations. Under the new schedule, major architectural violations could accumulate daily penalties up to $25,000 after notice and hearing. 6 months earlier. That bothered me. Then I searched the board minutes. In January, Martin had presented what he called a strengthened enforcement framework. The minutes said he believed inconsistent compliance had harmed property values and community standards. The board approved the new schedule 3-2. In February, he had proposed a visual harmony initiative. In March, he had complained that some owners mistake silence for permission. By April, he was talking like a man who had been waiting for an example. My parents had become that example. At 8:15, I called the HOA management company. Brookhaven Pines did not have a full-time office. It used a property management company called Redstone Community Services, which handled dues, mailings, pool passes, and the unpleasant task of being the first phone number angry homeowners found. A woman named Priya answered. Redstone Community Services, this is Priya. I introduced myself and explained that I was calling for my parents about the roof notice. Her keyboard clicked. I see the violation. We submitted an architectural request before installation. More clicking. Yes, I see a submission dated May 22nd. Was it reviewed? Pause. The committee has not marked it approved. Did they deny it? The notice indicates the improvement was installed without approval. That was not an answer. That was a sentence trained to avoid liability. Can you send me the committee's review notes? You'd need to submit a records request. Okay. How do I do that? She gave me an email address. Before we hung up, I asked, are there other metal roofs in Brookhaven Pines? Another pause. Shorter this time. I wouldn't have that information. Who would? The architectural committee. Of course. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood. Not in a dramatic way. I did not wear a trench coat or hide behind hedges. I put on running shoes, took my phone, and walked the same streets I had biked as a kid. Hawthorne, Briar, Waverly, Ashbury, Maple Glen. The neighborhood had 212 houses. I did not know that number yet, but I would. I found the charcoal standing seam roof on Briar Lane. I took a photo from the sidewalk, careful not to capture anything through windows. I found the bronze roof on Ashbury. Photo. A dark green metal roof on a sunroom addition on Waverly. Photo. A garage with corrugated metal panels behind a privacy fence, visible from the side street. Photo. A house on Maple Glen, with solar panels covering almost the entire rear slope, which was not a roof material issue exactly, but it told me the committee had allowed energy improvements before. Photo. Then I noticed the other violations. A bright red front door even though the guidelines allowed only earth tones. A white vinyl fence where the covenant still technically required wood. A black mailbox shaped like a fish. 3 sheds visible from the street. 2 basketball hoops that had clearly been permanent for years. A set of blue shutters that looked like they had come from a beach house. I was not mad at any of those people. That part matters. I did not care what color someone painted their door. I did not care if a kid had a basketball hoop. I did not want the HOA to punish more people. I wanted to know why, out of all those visible, long-standing violations, Martin had chosen my parents' roof. Selective enforcement is one of those phrases that sounds boring until you are the selected one. By the time I got back to my car, I had 37 photos. That evening, Dad looked through them at the kitchen table. That's Bill Kramer's roof, he said, pointing to the one on Briar. He put that on after the hailstorm in 2014. Was there a fight? Not that I remember. Mom leaned over. That one belongs to the Carters. They had an article in the neighborhood newsletter about saving on cooling bills. A metal roof? I think so. They called it a cool roof. I looked up from my laptop. A newsletter? Mom went to the den and came back with a plastic storage bin full of old HOA newsletters, school flyers, appliance manuals, and every warranty card she had ever been told to keep. If there is a gene for saving paperwork, my mother has 2 copies of it. We found the newsletter after 20 minutes, summer 2016. On the second page, under Homeowner Spotlight, there was a photo of the Carter house and a short blurb praising them for investing in an energy-conscious roof system that reduced summer heat load. The architectural committee at the time had approved it as part of a green improvement project. I stared at it. Dad said, "Well, would you look at that?" The roof was not just ignored. It had been celebrated. The next morning, I sent a polite email to Redstone and copied the HOA board. I wrote that my parents disputed the violation, that the roof had been installed after storm damage to prevent further water intrusion, that an architectural application had been submitted before installation, and that the material was an Energy Star-rated cool roof. I requested the committee's review notes, meeting minutes, written denial, if any, all records relating to roof material variances for the last 10 years, and the procedure for requesting a hearing. I attached the submission email and the auto reply. Then I waited. Martin responded in 23 minutes. Not Redstone. Martin. His email was short. Mr. Turner, your parents installed a prohibited roof without written approval. The committee is not obligated to debate clear violations by email. They may cure the violation by restoring an approved roofing material. If they wish to request a hearing, they may do so through Redstone. Regards, Martin Hale, Chair, Architectural Committee. I read it twice, mostly because I was fascinated by the phrase, not obligated to debate. Men like Martin love that phrase. It means, I know there is a conversation to be had, and I am trying to prevent it. I wrote back once. Mr. Hale, thank you. Please have Redstone send the hearing procedure and requested records. Wes Turner. Then I stopped emailing him directly. That was hard. I wanted to argue. I wanted to send him the newsletter. I wanted to ask whether the rules had been on vacation in 2016. But I had seen enough disputes at work to know that the first person to lose their temper in writing usually becomes Exhibit A for the other side. So I made a folder. At first, it was just on my laptop. Brookhaven Roof. Inside it, I made subfolders. Application, HOA documents, photos, correspondence, state law, other roofs. I saved everything as PDFs. I renamed files by date. I started a timeline in a spreadsheet. May 19th, storm damage. May 22nd, architectural request submitted. May 24th, HOA, auto reply received. May 31st to June 2nd, roof installed. June 12th, notice of violation received. June 13th, records request sent. It made me feel less helpless. Not better, just less helpless. 3 days later, Redstone sent the hearing procedure. My parents had the right to request a hearing before the board within 15 days of the notice. The board could affirm, modify, or dismiss the violation. Fines could not begin until after the hearing decision. That was good. The records request was another matter. Redstone said they would provide records within a reasonable time and might charge copying fees. I wrote back agreeing to electronic delivery. Then, for a week, nothing. Meanwhile, Martin started talking. The first call came from Mrs. Alvarez, who lived 2 doors down from my parents. She was 74, widowed, and had a front yard full of roses that Martin had once tried to cite because the trellis was 2 inches taller than the guidelines allowed. She called Mom on a Thursday afternoon. "Honey," she said, "I just want you to know people are hearing things." Mom put her on speaker. "What things?" I asked. Mrs. Alvarez lowered her voice, even though she was in her own house. "Martin told someone at the pool that your roof was installed without any permission, and that if the board lets you keep it, everyone will start doing whatever they want." Mom closed her eyes. "He said that?" "He said more than that. He said it was a test case." There it was. A test case. My parents were not a family dealing with storm damage. They were Martin's opportunity to prove that his new fine schedule had teeth. That night, Dad wanted to go to Martin's house. "Absolutely not," I said. "I'm not going to hit him." That's a comforting legal defense. "I'm going to ask him why he's running his mouth about us. And he's going to say you threatened him, and then this gets worse." Dad paced the kitchen. "So we just sit here?" "No. We document." He hated that answer. I did too. Documentation feels weak when someone is actively humiliating you. It feels like bringing a pencil to a knife fight. But I knew something Martin did not know yet. People who abuse small authority usually leave a trail because they cannot imagine anyone patient enough to follow it. By the second week, neighbors started quietly appearing, not in a crowd, one by one. Bill Kramer from Briar Lane stopped by while Dad was mowing the front strip. "Heard Hale's after you," Bill said. Dad killed the mower. Bill had lived in Brookhaven longer than my parents. He was one of those men who always wore a tucked-in polo, even on Saturdays. "You have a metal roof," Dad said. Bill looked up at his own street like the roof might hear him. "Yep. Did they approve it?" "They did. Back in 2014. Different committee then." "You got paperwork?" Bill laughed once. "My wife keeps everything." His wife did. That evening, Bill emailed me a scanned approval letter from 2014. It approved standing seam metal roofing in weathered bronze because it was architecturally compatible and energy efficient. It was signed by the prior committee chair. The next day, Denise Carter emailed Mom. She had heard from Mrs. Alvarez. Denise sent the 2016 approval packet for her cool roof, including the same kind of Energy Star documentation Luis had provided for my parents. Her approval letter used almost the exact phrase I had written in our application: energy-conscious roofing system. Then came the Parkers, who had solar panels. Then Mr. Singh, whose white vinyl fence had been approved after the committee decided wood fencing was too expensive to maintain. Then a woman named Lauren from Maple Glen, who said Martin had threatened to fine her over a playset but backed off when her husband, a lawyer, asked for the hearing transcript. Every message had the same flavor. "We do not want to get involved publicly, but here is what happened to us." That was Brookhaven Pines under Martin. A neighborhood full of adults whispering like students outside the principal's office. One evening, about 2 weeks after the violation letter, I went to Luis's office. He worked out of a low brick building beside a cabinet shop, with sample shingles hanging on the wall and a coffee machine that sounded like it was trying to clear its throat. I brought the HOA letter, the roof documents, and the old approval letters. Luis read everything without interrupting. When he reached the phrase, "reflective roofing materials are prohibited," he leaned back. "They love that word," he said. "Reflective?" "Yeah, they think it means shiny. The coating reflects solar radiation, not your neighbor's face." I almost laughed, but I was too tired. "You mentioned a state law." He nodded and pulled up a bookmarked page on his computer. "Here. State Property Code, section on energy efficiency measures in residential communities. It says associations can't prohibit or unreasonably restrict certain energy-efficient improvements. Roofing materials can be covered if they meet standards and don't create a safety issue. They can regulate appearance, color, placement, that kind of thing. But they can't just say no because an old bylaw says metal." I read the page. Then I read it again. It was not a magic wand. Laws rarely are. It did not say every homeowner could put any roof on any house. It said associations could not enforce covenants in a way that effectively prohibited energy efficiency measures meeting certain criteria, unless the association could show a legitimate interest and offered a reasonable alternative. Reasonable alternative. The HOA had not offered one. Martin had offered only tear it off. Luis printed the statute for me. He also printed the product certification, the reflectance rating, the Energy Star information, and the manufacturer's statement that the finish was non-glare. "Again," he said, handing me the packet, "I'm not your attorney." "Understood. But if they drag you into a hearing, make them explain why they approved those other roofs and not this one." "That's where I'm headed." He looked at me for a second. "Be careful. People like this don't usually care about the roof." "What do they care about?" Being obeyed. That line stayed with me. Being obeyed. The hearing was scheduled for July 11th at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. Redstone sent the notice by email and certified mail, as if my parents might try to escape by pretending not to know. The board would hear from the architectural committee, then from my parents, then deliberate in executive session. The notice said the board could uphold the violation and impose a compliance deadline. Mom read that last sentence and went pale. What if they make us take it off? I wanted to say they would not. Instead, I said, then we decide the next step. We can't pay another roof. I know. Your father won't say it, but he is scared. I looked through the kitchen window. Dad was outside adjusting the downspout Luis's crew had already adjusted twice. He was doing something with his hands because standing still would have made him think. I know, I said again. That was the lowest part for us. Not the meeting. Not Martin's smug little emails. It was those weeks before the hearing, when the removal order existed like a countdown in the house. Every normal thing had the roof underneath it. Mom making grocery lists, Dad watching baseball with the volume low, me answering work emails while secretly checking whether another HOA case had been posted online. The roof was already paid for. It was already installed. It was already doing the thing it was supposed to do. During the first heat wave after the storm, Mom said the upstairs hallway felt cooler. Their utility app showed lower afternoon usage than the same week the year before. The system worked. And still, because one man wanted an example, my parents were facing the possibility of tearing it off. That is a strange kind of stress. It does not explode. It seeps. Mom stopped sleeping well. Dad got quiet. I started waking up at 4:30 with phrases from the covenants in my head. Article 7. Schedule B. Express written variance. Major architectural violation. One Saturday morning, I found Dad in the garage, sitting on an overturned bucket with the violation letter in his hand. You know what bothers me? He said. Only one thing? He did not smile. I spent my whole life following rules. Permits, inspections, deadlines. Your mother and I never missed a dues payment, never had junk in the yard, never parked on the grass. Then this guy decides we're the criminals because we fixed storm damage too well. He looked down at the paper. Rules are supposed to protect people, not give somebody a stick. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as an HOA dispute and started thinking of it as a bully with letterhead. I told Dad, then we take away the stick. I did not know exactly how yet, but I was getting close. The records finally arrived 5 days before the hearing. Redstone sent a shared folder link at 4:58 p.m. on a Thursday because apparently every management company on Earth has a constitutional right to send important documents right before close of business. The folder contained minutes, architectural logs, and scanned approvals from the last 10 years. Not everything I requested, but enough. I opened the architectural log first. There were columns for address, owner, project, submission date, decision date, outcome, and notes. I filtered for roof. There they were. 2014, Briar Lane, standing seam metal, approved. 2016, Ashbury Court, cool roof metal system, approved. 2018, Waverly Drive, metal roof over sunroom, approved as accessory structure. 2019, Maple Glen, solar panel installation with roof reinforcement, approved. 2021, Briar Lane again, replacement panels after tree damage, approved. Then, in 2023, a note in Martin's handwriting scanned into the file. Future roof material requests should be reviewed for strict conformity with Schedule B. Prior approvals do not bind current committee. Prior approvals do not bind current committee. I sat back from the laptop. There it was. Martin knew. He knew other roofs existed. He knew they had been approved. He had even written himself a note trying to explain why he could ignore them. Now, that phrase may have been partly true in a narrow sense. One approval does not automatically approve every future project. But in an HOA, consistency matters. If you approve a material for one house because it is compatible and energy efficient, then deny the same material for another house without a real reason, you have a problem. If you ignore some violations for years and hammer one family with a massive fine, you have a bigger problem. Selective enforcement is not just, "they were mean to me." It means the association applied a rule arbitrarily, unequally, or in bad faith. Courts do not love that. Insurance carriers do not love that. Boards, if they understand their own liability, should hate it. The next document made it worse. It was an email chain from March between Martin and Redstone. The subject line was Enforcement Consistency. Priya from Redstone had written, "Martin, please remember that if the committee intends to pursue strict enforcement of older architectural provisions, it should consult counsel regarding prior variances and existing non-conforming improvements. Selective enforcement concerns may arise where similar conditions have been approved or tolerated." Martin replied, "We cannot allow past laxity to prevent present enforcement. Someone has to draw the line. Someone has to draw the line." And 2 months later, he drew it through my parents' roof. I printed that email and put it in the front of the binder. Yes, a binder. By then, Brookhaven Roof was no longer just a folder on my laptop. It was a 3-inch white binder with tabs: timeline, covenants, application, storm damage, roof specs, energy law, prior approvals, photos, correspondence, neighbor statements. I made 3 copies, one for me, one for the board, and one in case Martin tried to pretend he could not see. Aaron watched me assemble them on our dining room table. "You realize you look like you're preparing for a murder trial over shingles. Standing seam metal panels." "Sorry. Overstanding seam metal panels." I slid another sheet protector into place. "He threatened my parents with $25,000. Her expression softened. "I know. Mom asked me yesterday if they should take money out of their retirement account just in case." Aaron stopped joking then. "Finish the binder," she said. On Sunday, 2 days before the hearing, I drove the neighborhood again. This time I had a printed map and a checklist. I photographed every visible non-conforming roof or roof-related improvement. I noted whether it was visible from the street, approximate color, approximate age if a neighbor had told me, and whether it appeared in HOA records. I was not trying to shame anyone. In fact, I blurred house numbers in the packet I prepared for the board. But I needed the pattern. Martin's whole case depended on pretending my parents' roof was an isolated act of defiance. It was not. It was one more energy-efficient roof in a neighborhood that had quietly allowed them for at least 9 years. At house number 6 on my route, a woman I did not know came out to the sidewalk. "Are you Wes?" she asked. I lowered my phone. "Yes." "I'm Lauren, Maple Glen. We emailed." She was in her 40s, wearing gardening gloves and holding a hand trowel like she had forgotten it was in her hand. "I didn't mean to look suspicious," I said. "No, you're fine. I just wanted to give you this." She handed me a folded copy of a letter. "Martin sent that to us last year about our playset. Said it violated sightline standards. My husband asked for the written standard and hearing procedure. 2 days later, they withdrew it." I unfolded the letter. Martin's signature. Same tone. Cure the violation. Potential fines. "Do you mind if I include it?" "Please do. Just don't put our kids' names anywhere." "Of course." She glanced down the street, then back at me. "He does this when he thinks people won't fight. He tried it with the Alvarezes, too. He made Mrs. Alvarez cry over a rose trellis." "Who does that?" I did not have a good answer. Lauren sighed. I know an HOA is supposed to keep people from parking boats in the front yard or painting houses neon green. I get that. But he talks about property values like he's defending a museum. These are homes. People live here. That became the emotional center of my argument, though I did not know it yet. These are homes. People live here. The day before the hearing, Martin made his biggest mistake. He sent a neighborhood-wide email. Technically, it came through the Architectural Committee distribution list. The subject line was, "Maintaining Community Standards." It did not name my parents, but everyone knew. Dear Brookhaven Pines residents, recent events have highlighted the importance of adherence to our recorded covenants and architectural standards. The committee has become aware of a significant unauthorized alteration that, if permitted to remain, would undermine the uniform character of the community and invite further disregard for established rules. The board will address this matter at the upcoming meeting. Residents are encouraged to attend and support consistent enforcement. Consistent enforcement. I read that phrase 3 times. Then my phone started lighting up. Mrs. Alvarez. Is he talking about your parents? Bill Kramer. This guy is unbelievable. Denise Carter. I have the 2016 newsletter if you need the original. Lauren. He just invited half the neighborhood to watch him step on a rake. That last one made me laugh for the first time in days. But Martin's email changed the stakes. Until then, the hearing could have been a quiet administrative meeting. Now he had turned it into a public referendum on my parents. He had told the neighborhood they were flouting community standards. He had made them the example. Mom was mortified. I don't want to go, she said. We were at their kitchen table again. The binder sat between us. Dad looked at me. He did not say anything, but I could see the same thought on his face. We could go for them. We could spare Mom the room. Then Mom surprised both of us. She put one hand on the binder. No, she said. I am going. This is our house. Dad reached over and covered her hand with his. That is the part I wish Martin could have seen. Not because it would have changed him. I do not think it would have. But because people like him see a roof and a rule and a chance to perform authority. They do not see the retired school secretary who picked the paint color. They do not see the county mechanic who patched the gutters himself to save $300. They do not see the savings account, the wet ceiling, the sleepless nights, the quiet shame of being talked about at the pool. They see a target. By the morning of the hearing, my binder was ready. My opening statement was typed, then shortened again, because nobody wants to hear a project coordinator cosplay as a Supreme Court attorney. I had printed copies of the state statute with the relevant lines highlighted. I had a 1-page summary of prior metal roof approvals. I had photos arranged by street, with dates and notes. I had a copy of Martin's March email where Redstone warned him about selective enforcement. I also had one line written at the top of my legal pad. Do not gloat. I wrote it because I knew myself. There is a certain kind of satisfaction that comes when you know someone arrogant has made a mistake. It warms you up from the inside. It makes you want to lean forward and say, "Gotcha." But that is dangerous. Gloating makes the fight personal. The facts were better than any insult I could deliver. So I wrote it down. Do not gloat. The clubhouse parking lot was half full when we arrived at 6:42 p.m. That was unusual. Normally, HOA meetings attracted the board, 2 people angry about pool hours, and 1 man who asked about landscaping bids like it was a hostage negotiation. This time, cars lined both sides of the small lot. People stood in clusters near the door. Mom got very quiet. Dad said, "We can still leave." She shook her head. No. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like old carpet and chlorine from the pool next door. Folding chairs had been set up in rows. At the front, two rectangular tables formed a shallow U. The board sat there with name placards. The architectural committee sat off to one side. Martin was already in his chair, wearing a navy blazer even though it was July and the air conditioning was struggling. He saw us come in. He smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. I felt Dad tense beside me. "Don't," I murmured. "I didn't say anything." "You said it with your shoulders." We sat in the second row. I put the binder on my lap. Around us, people kept turning to look. Some gave my parents sympathetic little nods. Others looked curious, like they had come for a show and were trying not to admit it. At 7:01, the board president, a woman named Carol Whitcomb, called the meeting to order. Carol was an accountant, precise and tired-looking, with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. I did not know her well. She had been on the board before Martin rose to power, and from the minutes I had read, she usually tried to keep things calm. The problem was that calm people sometimes let loud people steer because it feels easier in the moment. Carol went through the agenda. Approval of minutes, treasurer's report, pool pump repair, landscaping contract. Everyone sat through it with the restless patience of people waiting for the main event. Then Carol said, "Next item is the architectural compliance hearing for 14 Hawthorne Court." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. Martin stood before Carol could ask him to. "Madam President," he said, "if I may summarize for the committee." Carol's mouth tightened slightly. Briefly. Martin picked up a folder. The owners of 14 Hawthorne Court installed a prohibited metal roof without written approval. The covenants are clear. Schedule B expressly prohibits metal and reflective roofing materials, unless a variance is granted. No variance was granted. This is not a minor deviation. It is a highly visible alteration that affects the visual harmony of the entire community. Visual harmony. The man could make a roof sound like a felony. He continued, "The committee understands there was storm damage. Many residents experienced storm damage. That does not give any owner the right to disregard the covenants. If we allow this roof to remain, we effectively abandon our standards. The committee therefore recommends that the board uphold the violation and order removal or replacement with approved material within 30 days, with fines to accrue if the owners fail to comply." He sat down. Mom's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Carol looked at us. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner, you may respond. You can speak yourselves, or have someone speak on your behalf." Dad looked at Mom. Mom looked at me. I stood. "My name is Wes Turner. I'm their son. With the board's permission, I'll speak for them." Carol nodded. I walked to the front with the binder and 3 packets. I handed one to Carol, one to the board secretary, and one to Martin. Martin did not open his. That was his second mistake. I started simple. My parents are not asking for special treatment. They're asking not to be singled out under a rule the association has not applied consistently and may not be able to enforce in the way the committee is trying to enforce it. Martin shifted in his chair. Good. After the May storm, their roof was damaged badly enough that the house was leaking. They submitted an architectural application before installation. The HOA's own auto response said emergency repairs may proceed as necessary to protect property from damage, subject to final approval. They obtained a building permit. They used a licensed local contractor. The roof is matte charcoal, non-glare, Energy Star rated, and similar in appearance to other roofs already approved in Brookhaven Pines. I heard a murmur behind me. Martin opened his packet. I turned to the board. There are 2 issues here. First, selective enforcement. Second, state law protecting energy efficiency improvements. Carol looked down at the packet. The board treasurer, a man named Ken, leaned forward. I had never seen him at anything except the annual picnic, where he ran the grill and avoided conflict by focusing on hamburgers. Now he looked like someone had handed him a tax problem. I said, "On selective enforcement, the association has approved or tolerated multiple metal or energy-efficient roof systems over the last decade. I walked them through the list. Briar Lane, approved in 2014. Ashbury Court, approved in 2016. Waverly Drive, approved in 2018. Briar Lane replacement panels, approved in 2021. I showed the approval letters. I showed the newsletter praising Denise Carter's cool roof. I showed photos. Not too many. Enough." Martin interrupted at the third photo. "Those are not comparable." Carol looked at him. "Martin, you'll have a chance." He sat back, but his face had changed. The smile was gone. I continued. "The association's own records show that prior committees approved similar materials as architecturally compatible and energy efficient. If the current committee wants to change policy, it can propose a clear, updated standard for all homeowners. What it cannot do, in my understanding, is ignore existing approvals and then threaten one family with a $25,000 fine for the same kind of improvement." I turned a page. And the committee was warned about that. That was when the room got very still. I read from Priya's March email, not dramatically, just clearly. "Please remember that if the committee intends to pursue strict enforcement of older architectural provisions, it should consult council regarding prior variances and existing non-conforming improvements. Selective enforcement concerns may arise where similar conditions have been approved or tolerated." I looked up. Mr. Hale responded, "We cannot allow past laxity to prevent present enforcement. Someone has to draw the line." Behind me, someone whispered, "Wow." Martin's ears had gone red. Carol turned to him. "Martin, is that email accurate?" He adjusted his glasses. That was an internal discussion about general enforcement philosophy. "Is it accurate?" "I believe so. Yes." I did not look at Dad. I could feel him wanting to laugh without moving a muscle. Then I moved to the statute. The second issue is state law. Our state property code limits an association's ability to prohibit energy efficiency measures. It allows reasonable regulation of appearance and safety, but it does not allow an association to enforce older covenants in a way that unreasonably restricts qualifying energy-efficient improvements. I handed Carol the highlighted statute. "This roof is not corrugated barn metal. It's a residential standing seam system with a certified cool roof coating. The contractor's certification and product data are in the packet. If the concern is glare, the finish is matte and non-glare. If the concern is color, it is charcoal. Similar to the prior roof and consistent with other dark roofs in the neighborhood. If the concern is energy performance, it meets the standard the statute is designed to protect." Martin leaned forward. "That law does not eliminate architectural review." I nodded. "Correct. It doesn't. My parents aren't arguing that it does. The board can still apply reasonable standards, but ordering removal of a completed, permitted, energy-efficient roof after storm damage, when similar roofs were approved for other owners, is not reasonable. It is exactly the kind of enforcement problem that statute and selective enforcement doctrine are meant to prevent." I saw Carol's eyes flick to the management representative seated against the wall. Priya was there, taking notes. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. The board secretary, Tom, cleared his throat. "Has council reviewed this?" Carol said, "Not yet." Martin said, "I don't think council is necessary for a straightforward violation." That was his third mistake. Priya spoke for the first time. "Madam President, Redstone would recommend legal review before imposing removal or significant fines in light of the materials provided." The room heard it. Everyone heard it. The management company had just stepped away from Martin. Martin turned toward her. With respect, Priya, management does not decide architectural standards. Priya kept her voice flat. No, the board does. My recommendation is about process and risk. Process and risk. Those are boring words unless you are sitting on a volunteer board realizing your architectural chair may have dragged you toward a lawsuit. Carol asked if my parents wanted to speak. Dad surprised me by standing. He did not take the microphone at first. He just stood beside me, hands in his pockets, looking at the board. "I'm not good at this," he said. That was all it took for the room to lean in. "My wife and I have lived here 29 years. We raised our son here. We paid every due. We asked before we did the roof because that's what you're supposed to do. The house was leaking. We fixed it. We didn't put on a circus tent. We put on a roof." A few people laughed softly. Dad looked at Martin. "And I don't appreciate being talked about like I'm trying to wreck the neighborhood." Martin's jaw moved, but he did not speak. Dad continued. "If the board says there needs to be a better rule, fine, make one. We'll follow fair rules. But don't tell my wife she might lose $25,000 because Mr. Hale wants to draw a line on our house." He sat down. Mom reached for his hand. That should have been the turning point. A reasonable person would have seen the board's discomfort, the management company's warning, the documents, the room, and looked for a graceful exit. A reasonable person would have said, "Given the new information, we should table this for legal review." A reasonable person might even have apologized. Martin Hale was not a reasonable person when his authority was challenged. He stood again. "May I respond?" Carol hesitated. Briefly. He picked up my packet this time and held it like it smelled bad. "This is exactly the problem. We are now litigating by ambush. The committee cannot function if every homeowner who dislikes a decision arrives with a binder and an internet statute. Prior committees made mistakes. That does not obligate this committee to repeat them. The covenants say what they say. Metal roofs are prohibited unless a variance is granted. The Turners did not wait for approval. If they had, we could have discussed alternatives. Instead, they installed first and now demand forgiveness." He turned slightly, so he was addressing the room as much as the board. "Community standards only work if residents respect them. If we carve out exceptions because someone claims hardship or finds a loophole, we will have no standards left." Then he looked directly at me. "Rules are rules." There it was, the callback before the payoff. He handed it to me like a gift. I wrote 3 words on my legal pad. "Rules are rules." Carol asked the board if they had questions. Ken, the treasurer, did. "Martin, did the committee review the Turner's application before issuing the violation?" Martin said, "The installation had already occurred." "That isn't what I asked." Another murmur. Martin pressed his lips together. "We reviewed the file after observing the completed roof." Tom asked, "Was there a formal denial?" "The violation notice functioned as denial." Priya looked down at her notes. That was not a good look for Martin. Carol asked, "Did the committee consider the energy statute?" Martin said, "I don't believe it applies." "Did council tell you that?" "No." "Did anyone?" "It is my reading." Carol took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She had let Martin run too far ahead, and now she had to decide whether to follow him off the cliff. The board went into executive session for 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt longer than the whole month before them. We waited in the clubhouse with everyone else. People whispered. Someone from the back came up and squeezed Mom's shoulder. Bill Kramer walked over to Dad and said, "Whatever happens, you did fine." Mrs. Alvarez brought Mom a cup of water, even though the cooler was only 10 feet away. Martin stood near the windows with 2 members of his committee. He kept his back to us, but I could see his reflection in the glass. He was talking fast. His hands moved in sharp little chops. One of the committee members, a woman named Eileen, nodded at first, then stopped nodding. That was the moment I realized Martin was losing the room. Not the board yet. The room. People had come expecting a fight over whether my parents broke a rule. What they saw was a pattern. Other roofs. Prior approvals. A warning from management. A state law. A chair who had decided someone had to be made an example. That changes how a room breathes. When the board returned, Carol's face gave nothing away. She called the meeting back to order. "The board has reviewed the materials presented tonight," she said. "Given the legal issues raised, including prior approvals and state law relating to energy efficiency improvements, the board is not prepared to impose fines or order removal at this time." At this time, Mom squeezed my arm. Carol continued. "The board will refer the matter to Association Council. Pending that review, enforcement is stayed. No fines will accrue." It was not a full win, but it was the first time in a month that my mother took a full breath. Martin was already reaching for his microphone. Carol saw him. "Not now, Martin." 2 words. Quiet. Firm. Not now. That might have been the first public consequence he had felt in years. The meeting moved on, technically. Nobody cared about the landscaping contract after that. People left in clumps. Some stopped to talk to my parents. A few avoided eye contact, which was fine. Not everyone likes being near conflict after the heat comes off. In the parking lot, Mom hugged me hard. "Thank you," she whispered. "We're not done." "I know, but I can sleep tonight." That was enough for that moment. Martin walked past us on his way to his car. Dad and I both saw him. He could have kept walking. He could have said nothing. He could have done one normal human thing and let the night end. Instead, he stopped. "Enjoy your temporary reprieve," he said. Dad took one step forward. I put a hand on his chest. Martin looked at me. "You think a binder changes recorded covenants?" I said, "No. I think recorded covenants have to be enforced legally." He smiled again, but now it looked thinner. "We'll see." Then he got into his Lexus and drove off. What Martin did not know, and what made the next part work, was that by sending that neighborhood-wide email, he had accidentally turned a private enforcement dispute into a campaign issue. The board sent the roof packet to council the next morning. I know because Priya emailed me at 9:12 a.m. asking for digital copies of everything I had presented. I sent the folder link by 9:30. At 9:47, she replied with, "Received, thank you," which is management company language for, "Please stop creating records I will have to produce later." For a week, there was silence. Not peaceful silence, legal silence. The kind where everyone is waiting for someone with a bar license to tell them how expensive their mistake could become. During that week, the neighborhood kept talking. Martin had wanted residents to attend and support consistent enforcement. They had attended. What they supported afterward was not him. Mrs. Alvarez called Mom every morning with updates she claimed she was not collecting. Bill says Ken looked furious after the meeting. Denise says Carol asked for all old architectural files. Lauren says her husband wants to know why the board didn't consult council before threatening fines that large. Mom would say, "I don't want gossip." Then she would put the phone on speaker. I did not rely on gossip, but it told me where the pressure was moving. Martin had built his little authority on the assumption that people were isolated. A homeowner with a trellis problem did not know about the homeowner with the playset problem. The family with the roof did not know about the family with the fence. Everyone thought their issue was private and embarrassing. The hearing connected them. By the following Monday, I had received 14 emails from neighbors. Some sent approval letters. Some sent violation notices. Some just wrote paragraphs about how Martin had spoken to them. I asked each person the same thing. Do I have permission to share this with the board if needed? Most said yes, as long as phone numbers and children's names were removed. That became the second binder. I called it Pattern of Enforcement. Aaron saw the label and said, "You are absolutely becoming the HOA's sleep paralysis demon. I prefer civic participant. You labeled a binder pattern of enforcement. Civic participant with tabs." The funny thing was, I still did not want a war with the HOA. Neither did my parents. We wanted the roof accepted, the fine gone, and the rule clarified so nobody else had to go through this. But Martin had made that hard because his authority was now tied to the outcome. If the roof stayed, he looked wrong. If he looked wrong, people might wonder what else he had been wrong about, and people were wondering. On July 19th, Carol called me. I was at work, standing in a mechanical room while a technician explained why a rooftop unit was short-cycling. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I stepped into the hallway and answered. "Wes, this is Carol Whitcomb from the Brookhaven Board." Her voice sounded careful. "Hi, Carol. I'm calling to let you know Council has provided preliminary guidance. The board will be meeting next week to vote on resolution of your parents' matter." "Okay. I can't discuss attorney advice in detail, but I can tell you the board will not be pursuing fines at this time." At this time again. Boards love leaving themselves little doors. "What about removal?" She paused. "I expect the motion will address that." "Carol." Another pause. Then she sighed. "Off the record, Wes. Nobody is ordering your parents to tear off that roof." I leaned against the hallway wall. For a second I could hear the rooftop unit thumping through the concrete block behind me. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet. There will be conditions. Color, maintenance, non-glare certification for the file, things like that." "We can live with reasonable conditions." I thought so. Then her voice changed, lower. "I also want you to know the board is reviewing the architectural committee process." That was a careful sentence. Because of Martin? Because of several issues. Several issues. Another careful sentence. Understood. After we hung up, I called Mom. She answered on the second ring. "Are you sitting down?" "Wes." "They're not ordering removal." There was silence. Then Mom started crying. Not loud. Just the soft, exhausted crying of someone whose body had been holding a brace for too long and finally let go. Dad took the phone from her. "Say it again." "They're not ordering removal." He exhaled once. "Okay." That was all he said. But I knew my dad. That okay carried 30 days of fear. The formal vote happened July 26th. I went with my parents again, though this meeting was smaller. Martin was there too, of course. He sat with the architectural committee, arms folded, not looking at us. Carol read the motion. The board would deem the roof approved as installed, subject to the color and non-glare certification already submitted. No fines would be assessed. No removal would be ordered. The board would direct the architectural committee to suspend enforcement of the metal roofing prohibition pending review and amendment of the guidelines to comply with current law and prior association practice. There it was. Approved as installed. No fines, no removal. Suspend enforcement. The vote was 4-1. Martin could not vote because he was not on the board. That may have been the only thing that kept him from trying to filibuster, but he did ask to speak after the vote. Carol allowed it, probably hoping to give him a chance to save face. He did not take it. "I want the minutes to reflect my objection," he said. "This decision undermines the committee's authority and invites non-compliance. I also believe the board has rewarded owners who proceeded without approval." Carol said, "Your objection will be noted." Dad leaned toward me and whispered, "Do not gloat." I almost lost it. After the meeting, Martin walked out without speaking to us. Mom watched him go, then looked at Carol. Does this mean it's over? Carol's face softened. For your roof, yes. For your roof. That was an important distinction, because for Martin, it was not over. Brookhaven Pines held board elections every October. Normally, nobody cared. The annual meeting happened in the clubhouse with stale cookies and a quorum achieved only because half the neighborhood sent proxy forms to whoever knocked first. Positions turned over slowly because serving on an HOA board is volunteer work, and volunteer work with angry emails is not exactly a prize. Martin had never been elected to the board. He chaired the architectural committee because the board appointed him. But two of his allies were on the board, and one of them, Tom, was up for re-election that fall. The architectural committee chair also had to be reappointed annually after the board election. In other words, if people wanted Martin gone, October mattered. I did not start the campaign. That credit goes to Mrs. Alvarez. She called Mom in early August and said, "We need nicer people in charge." Mom said, "That's true everywhere." "No, I mean here." Within a week, Mrs. Alvarez had invited 8 neighbors to her living room for coffee. I went because Mom asked me to bring the binder. I expected a complaint session. Instead, I found the most polite insurgency imaginable. There were lemon bars. There were printed agendas. Mrs. Alvarez had name tags. Bill Kramer came. Denise Carter came. Lauren from Maple Glen came with her husband, David, who really was a lawyer, but looked more like a tired soccer dad. Ken, the board treasurer, did not come, because sitting board members had to be careful, but his wife dropped off a folder of public documents and left before anyone could call it a meeting. Mrs. Alvarez opened by saying, "I am too old to be scared of a man with a clipboard." That set the tone. Nobody wanted to abolish the HOA. That is important. This was not one of those fantasies where everyone stands up and destroys the entire system in a night. Brookhaven had common areas, a pool, a retention pond, insurance, landscaping contracts. Someone had to manage those things. The problem was not that rules existed. The problem was that Martin had treated rules like personal property. David explained the practical path. "You need board candidates," he said. "At least 2. You need proxies. You need a simple message. Fair rules, transparent process, legal compliance. Do not make it a vendetta against Martin, even if everyone knows it is partly about Martin." Mrs. Alvarez looked disappointed by that last part. "Can we mention the rose trellis?" "You can mention inconsistent enforcement," David said. "That is less fun." "It is more useful." We built the campaign around 3 points: fair enforcement, updated guidelines, neighbor respect, no screaming, no personal insults, no accusing anyone of corruption, just facts. The roof case became an example, not the whole message. We summarized it as, the association nearly imposed a $25,000 fine under an outdated rule, despite prior approvals and state law concerns, costing the board legal fees and creating unnecessary stress for residents. That sentence did more damage to Martin than any insult could have. Because it was true. Over the next 2 months, Brookhaven Pines became a case study in how quickly quiet resentment turns into organization once people realize they are not alone. Lauren built a simple website. It listed candidate bios, meeting dates, and the text of proposed bylaw and guideline reforms. Bill handled proxies because he knew everyone from the old neighborhood watch days. Denise wrote a 1-page explainer on energy-efficient improvements, using her own roof as the example. Mrs. Alvarez called people. She was terrifyingly effective. I helped with documents, because apparently once you build one binder, the universe assigns you more binders. We requested official records. We reviewed fine revenue. We compared architectural decisions. We found that under Martin's 2 years as chair, violation notices had tripled, but formal approvals had slowed. We found that some applications sat unanswered past the committee's own 30-day review window. We found no written rubric for deciding variances. We found that the committee had no conflict of interest policy, no appeal checklist, and no standard script for hearings. None of that was criminal. It was not even dramatic by itself, but it painted a picture of a process run on personality instead of rules. Martin reacted exactly the way Luis had predicted. He did not care about the roof. He cared about being obeyed. In late August, he sent another email, this one only to people he apparently considered supporters. Someone forwarded it to me within an hour. The subject line was, "Concerned about direction of community." In it, Martin warned that a vocal minority was trying to weaken standards, expose the association to decline, and turn Brookhaven Pines into a patchwork of personal preferences. He said recent criticism of the committee was deeply unfair to volunteers who dedicate countless hours to protecting property values. Then he made the worst possible choice. He attached before and after photos of my parents' house, not just the roof, the house. Their address was visible on the mailbox. Mom saw the email because 3 people forwarded it to her with angry notes. She called me crying again, but this time it was not fear. It was humiliation. "Why would he do that?" she said. "Because men like Martin always think the room belongs to them." Dad wanted to sue him. I told him to wait. David the lawyer told all of us to wait. Then Lauren did something better. She wrote a calm public response and posted it on the campaign website. It said, "We are disappointed to see individual homes used in campaign material without owner permission." The issue before Brookhaven is not whether one family should be embarrassed for making a permitted, energy-efficient repair after storm damage. The issue is whether our association will apply rules fairly, transparently, and in compliance with law. We believe neighbor respect includes not using someone's home as a warning poster. She did not name Martin. She did not have to. That response traveled faster than Martin's email. By dinner, people were sharing it in text threads. By the next morning, Carol had sent a board notice reminding all committee members not to use owner addresses or property photos in unofficial communications. Martin had tried to shame my parents again. He ended up proving the campaign's point. The September board meeting was the first one I had ever seen run out of chairs. People came because of the election. People came because of the roof. People came because Mrs. Alvarez had called them and said, "If you do not show up, do not complain to me later." That woman could have run a small country with a landline. Public comment lasted 40 minutes. A man from Waverly said his fence application had been ignored for 3 months, while the committee sent him notices about weeds along the side yard. A woman from Maple Glen said she had stopped planting anything near the sidewalk because she was tired of wondering whether Martin would cite it. Denise Carter stood and said, "My energy-efficient roof was approved and praised by this association in 2016. I do not appreciate seeing another family threatened for doing the same thing." Bill Kramer said, "Standards are fine. Arbitrary standards are not." Then my mother stood. She had not planned to speak. I know because she had spent the drive there telling me she was not going to. But after Denise sat down, Mom got up slowly and walked to the microphone. The room quieted in that way. Rooms do when someone visibly nervous decides to speak anyway. "I'm Linda Turner," she said. 14 Hawthorne Court. Martin looked down at the table. Mom held a folded piece of paper, but she barely looked at it. "My husband and I were embarrassed by what happened with our roof. We felt like we had done something wrong when we were just trying to repair storm damage. For weeks, I was afraid to walk to the mailbox because I did not know who had heard what about us." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "I believe neighborhoods need rules. I worked in a school for almost 30 years. I know what happens when there are no rules. But rules should not be used to scare people. They should not be enforced on one family and ignored for another. And no neighbor's home should be used as an example without their permission. She folded the paper tighter. That's all. She sat down. Dad wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand and pretended he had allergies. That speech did more than any document I had prepared. Because up to that point, Martin's defenders could tell themselves this was about architectural philosophy. Mom made it about how power feels when it lands on a kitchen table. After the meeting, Carol approached my parents. "Linda," she said, "I'm sorry. It was not a formal board apology, it was not in the minutes. It did not fix the month of fear. But it mattered to Mom." Martin left through the side door. By early October, the election had become the most interesting thing to happen in Brookhaven Pines since the pool heater failed during Memorial Day weekend. 2 reform candidates ran for the board, Lauren from Maple Glen and a retired civil engineer named Samir Patel. Their platform was aggressively boring, which is exactly what it needed to be. Update architectural guidelines, publish response deadlines, require written findings for denials, create a fair appeal process, consult counsel before major fines or removal orders, review committee appointments annually. Martin's side tried to frame them as anti-standard. It did not stick. Too many people had their own letters in drawers. Too many people had watched him embarrass my parents. Too many people had realized that a fair process would protect them, whether they wanted solar panels, a fence, a roof, or just the right to plant roses without a man measuring the trellis. The annual meeting was on October 17th. I remember that date because Mom baked cookies for it, which felt like bringing snacks to a revolution. The clubhouse was packed again. Proxies had been collected. Ballots were printed. Redstone sent 2 staff members instead of 1, probably because the last few months had taught them Brookhaven was no longer a sleepy account. Martin arrived in a gray suit and sat near the front with Tom and Eileen. He looked composed, but he kept checking the room. His eyes moved from cluster to cluster, counting. For the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure of the math. Carol opened the meeting. The election procedure was explained. Candidates gave short statements. Tom, Martin's ally, spoke first. He talked about preserving standards, respecting volunteers, and avoiding reactionary changes based on isolated disputes. He did not name my parents. He did not have to. Lauren spoke next. "Brookhaven does not need fewer standards," she said. "It needs clearer standards. It needs standards that a homeowner can read, understand, and rely on. It needs enforcement that is consistent enough to be trusted. When rules are fair, people follow them. When rules feel personal, people hide from them. That's not a community." Samir spoke after her. "I'm an engineer," he said. "I like written criteria. If a roof is denied, the owner should know why. If a fence is approved, the next owner with the same fence should know what standard applies. This is not radical. This is maintenance." That line got a laugh. This is maintenance. Then voting happened. Paper ballots, proxy counts. 2 Redstone employees at a folding table with a laptop and a lockbox. It took 43 minutes. During that time, people milled around and pretended not to stare at the counting table. Martin stood by the coffee urn holding a paper cup he never drank from. I was near the back with Dad. "You nervous?" I asked him. "No." "Liar." "A little." Mom was sitting with Mrs. Alvarez, who had brought her own pen, in case they try anything, which tells you why she and I got along. At 8:36, Carol returned to the microphone with the results. Lauren won the first seat. Samir won the second. Tom lost by 29 votes. It was not a landslide in national politics terms. In HOA terms, it was an earthquake. The room reacted before Carol could finish. Not cheering, exactly. More like a wave of exhaling. A few people clapped, then more, then almost everyone. Martin did not clap. He set his untouched coffee in the trash and walked out before the meeting adjourned. But the real understanding moment, the one from the hook, the one where he realized his own rule could not be applied to just one house, came 2 weeks later. The new board's first organizational meeting was on November 2nd. It was supposed to be procedural. Elect officers, appoint committees, set meeting dates. But because Brookhaven had become Brookhaven, the room was half full again. I almost did not go. My parents' roof was approved. The election was over. I had work emails stacking up, and a wife who had been very patient with my second career as a volunteer document goblin. But Mom wanted to attend because Lauren had asked if she would be willing to serve on a homeowner guidelines review group. Mom said yes, then immediately panicked and asked me to come. So I went. Martin came too. That surprised me. I thought he might skip it out of pride. Instead, he sat in the second row wearing his navy blazer, jaw set, as if sheer posture could hold the old order together. The board handled officers first. Carol remained president. Ken stayed treasurer. Lauren became secretary. Samir took the vice president role. Then Carol moved to committee appointments. "The next item is appointment of standing committee chairs," she said. "Given the issues identified this year, I propose that the Architectural Committee be temporarily restructured while the guidelines are reviewed." Martin's head came up. Carol continued, "Specifically, I move that the current chair appointment be ended effective tonight, that the committee operate with co-chairs during the review period, and that all denial recommendations include written findings tied to specific guideline language." The room went very quiet. Martin stood. "Madam President, I object." Carol said, "Public comment will be after the motion is seconded." Samir seconded. Martin stayed standing. "You cannot remove a committee chair without cause." Lauren looked down at the bylaws in front of her. "Committee chairs are appointed annually by the board and serve at the board's pleasure," she said. Article 5, Section 3. Martin blinked. I saw it then. The first crack. Not anger, confusion. He was used to being the person who quoted the documents. He was not used to someone quoting them back. Carol allowed discussion. Martin walked to the microphone. He carried a folder, because of course he did. "For 2 years," he said, "I have donated hundreds of hours to maintaining this community's standards. I have taken abuse from residents who simply do not want to follow rules. If the board removes me because I enforced the covenants, you send a message that intimidation works." He looked toward my parents when he said intimidation. Dad's hands tightened on his knees. Mom kept her eyes forward. Martin continued, "The roof matter has been misrepresented. The Turners violated a clear rule. The board chose not to enforce it because of pressure and legal fear. That does not make the committee wrong." Lauren raised her hand slightly. Carol nodded. Lauren said, "Martin, the issue was not that the committee reviewed a roof. The issue was that the committee threatened removal and a $25,000 fine without addressing prior approvals, state law, or the management company's warning about selective enforcement." Martin turned. "Prior approvals do not bind current committees." Samir said, "They do not automatically bind. They do inform consistency. That distinction matters." Martin's face tightened. "So we are abandoning the covenants." Ken, the treasurer, spoke then. Ken had been quiet through most of the saga, but when he did talk, people listened because he sounded like he would rather be grilling. "No," Ken said. "We're trying to keep the covenants enforceable. Council's memo was clear. If we apply rules inconsistently, we weaken them." Martin looked at Carol. "I would like that memo read into the record." Carol said, "The memo is privileged. The board can summarize the operational guidance." "Convenient." That word landed badly. Carol's eyes cooled. "Martin, be careful." but he could not stop. That is the thing about petty tyrants. When obedience starts slipping, they often tighten their grip instead of letting go. And tightening is what shows everyone the grip was the problem. He pointed toward my parents. They installed a metal roof. Schedule B says metal roofs are prohibited. That is the rule. If rules mean anything, that roof should not be there. And that was when I asked to speak. Carol looked at me for a moment. I think she knew exactly where this was going. Briefly, Wes. I walked to the microphone with one sheet of paper. Not the binder this time. One sheet. I only want to respond to the phrase, rules mean anything, I said. Martin looked away like he was bored, but his foot was tapping. Rules do mean something. They mean the board has to follow the covenants too. They mean the committee has to follow the appeal process. They mean state law supersedes old restrictions where it applies. They mean similar homeowners have to be treated similarly unless there is a written reason. They mean you cannot use a rule against one house while ignoring the same condition at another, because one owner is easier to scare. The room was silent. I turned slightly toward Martin. At the July hearing, you told my parents, rules are rules, tear it off. His foot stopped. So yes, rules are rules. All of them, not just the sentence that gives you power. I stepped back. I did not smile. I did not add anything. I did not need to. That was the moment he understood. You could see it move across his face in pieces. First annoyance, because he thought I was just repeating a line to embarrass him. Then recognition, because he remembered saying it. Then calculation, because he looked at the board and realized nobody was coming to rescue him from his own words. Then something smaller. Not remorse. I will not give him that much credit. It was the look of a man realizing the tool he had been swinging around was not actually his. The covenants were not his. The fine schedule was not his. The committee was not his. The neighborhood was not his. He had been borrowing authority from rules he only respected when they pointed outward. Now they pointed back. His mouth opened slightly. For once, no sentence came out. Carol called for the vote. Lauren voted yes. Samir voted yes. Ken voted yes. Carol voted yes. The fifth board member, Eileen's husband Mark, hesitated, then voted yes too. Unanimous. Martin Hale was no longer chair of the architectural committee. No one clapped this time. That would have been too much. And honestly, it would have helped him. Instead, the room did something worse for a man like Martin. It moved on. Carol appointed Lauren and Samir as temporary co-chairs for the guideline review. She asked for volunteers for a homeowner advisory group. Mom raised her hand. So did Denise Carter, Bill Kramer, Mrs. Alvarez, and 3 people I did not know. Martin stood by the microphone for a second after the vote, holding his folder. Then he gathered his papers and walked back to his seat. He did not leave. I think leaving would have looked too much like defeat, and he still wanted to believe posture mattered. So he sat there for the rest of the meeting while the board discussed pool furniture, snow removal bids, and the 2024 reserve study. That was the most satisfying part, not because he had to suffer, because he had to listen to normal business continue without him at the center of it. The roof rule was amended in February. The process took longer than anyone expected because every sentence in an HOA guideline apparently has to survive 3 meetings, 2 drafts, and at least one man asking whether matte black is the same as charcoal. But the final version was solid. It allowed standing seam metal roofs and other energy-efficient roofing systems if they met color, glare, pitch, and installation standards. It required the committee to respond to complete applications within 30 days. It required written reasons for denial. It created an appeal process. It also said prior approvals and existing conditions had to be considered when evaluating consistency. No more pretending the neighborhood began the day Martin got a clipboard. My parents' roof stayed exactly where it was. That winter, when the first snow came, it slid off the back slope in neat sheets and landed with soft thumps in the yard. Dad called me just to report that like it was a sporting event. "You should see this thing work," he said. "The roof?" "The roof." "Dad, most people don't review roofs. Most people don't almost get fined 25 grand for one." Fair point. Martin did not disappear. People like that rarely do. He still lived on Waverly. He still walked his dog past houses with the air of a man inspecting troops. But he had no committee chair, no special email signature, no ability to send cure notices with his name at the bottom. For a while, he tried to remain influential from the audience. At meetings, he asked pointed questions. He warned about slippery slopes. He used the phrase property values so often that Lauren started keeping a tally in the margin of her agenda. But it was different. Once people stop being afraid of a petty tyrant, the same behavior that used to intimidate them starts to look small. The most ironic detail came in April. Martin submitted an architectural application for solar panels. I am not making that up. His electric bills had gone up, and apparently a contractor had convinced him that rooftop solar would improve resale value. Under the old Martin standard, the committee might have delayed, argued, or demanded changes without written criteria. Under the new standard, Lauren and Samir reviewed the application, applied the guidelines, requested one small adjustment to conduit placement, and approved it in 21 days. Mom heard about it from Mrs. Alvarez, who had somehow become the unofficial Associated Press of Brookhaven Pines. "Can you believe it?" Mom asked me. "Did they approve it fairly?" "Yes." "Then good." She was quiet for a second, then laughed. "You're better than I am." I was not really. I just understood the point by then. The win was never supposed to be making Martin suffer under a bad process. The win was taking the bad process out of his hands. That summer, my parents hosted a cookout. Nothing huge. Burgers, folding chairs, neighbors drifting in and out of the backyard. Bill brought potato salad. Denise brought a pie. Mrs. Alvarez brought roses from the trellis Martin had once tried to cite, and she put them in a vase in the middle of the patio table like a flag. At one point, Dad and I stood in the driveway, looking at the roof. The evening sun was low enough that the charcoal panels looked almost blue. "You know," he said, "I didn't even want metal at first. I remember. Now I love it out of spite. That's a valid warranty category." He laughed. Across the street, a couple from the next block walked by with their dog. The husband looked up and said, "Roof looks good, Dan." Dad said, "Thanks." That was it. No drama, no whispers, no shame at the mailbox. Just a neighbor complimenting a roof. Mom came out carrying a tray of lemonade and caught me looking at the house. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. For months, that roof had been treated like a violation, a threat, a symbol in Martin's little morality play about obedience. Now it was just what it had always been supposed to be, a roof, keeping rain off my parents, keeping heat out of the attic, sitting there quietly while the neighborhood got on with being a neighborhood again. And every time I drove past the Brookhaven Pines entrance after that, I noticed the sign Martin had spent all that money refurbishing. The daylilies had grown back around it. The post was straight again. Under the carved neighborhood name, someone on the new landscaping committee had planted a small bed of mixed flowers, reds and yellows and purples, none of them perfectly uniform. It looked better that way. If you have ever had someone use a rule against you that they never used against anyone else, you already know what this felt like. The rule itself is frustrating. The hypocrisy is worse. But the worst part is the way they expect you to shrink because the letterhead looks official. My parents almost did. Honestly, I almost did too. But Martin made one mistake he could not undo. He thought rules were weapons, and he forgot they were also records. Records can be read. Records can be compared. Records can be brought into a room and placed on a table in front of the people who are legally responsible for what happens next. He told us, rules are rules. Tear it off. So we followed the rules. All of them.